Well, I thank the gentleman from Georgia for yielding, but especially for his leadership here in the United States Congress, and especially on the FairTax. And that introduction, Mr. Speaker, it flashes back to me some of the things that I haven't really spoken to recently, and how far we haven't come over the years that this became obviously the best thing that we could possibly do from a tax perspective in America, or anywhere in the world for that matter. And I've often told the story, but I should say used to tell this story often, and that is that I'm running my little construction business that I started up in 1975, and we've completed 41 years in business. And I was audited one too many years in a row by the IRS, and I had learned that we didn't have copy machines in those days, so if they could ask for data, I would have just said, here, I'll run all these copies, you can analyze them, I'll go out and start a machine up and go to work, make a little money so I can pay my taxes. But what it really did was it shut me down. It shut me down because I had to sit there in my office and serve papers out to the auditor because I was the one that knew where the papers were, and they were in my filing cabinet, and I had learned in audits that I didn't want to just say, here's the filing cabinet, I'm going to work, let me know what the bill is when you're done. It didn't work out too well for me. And so I sat there for 4 days and I served up papers to the IRS. I'd say, I'll give you a paper, you can look at it, you can take your notes, do what you will. When you're done with that paper, hand it back to me, I'll put it back in the file, and then you ask for another record, I'll give it to you. We did that for 4 days. And at the end of that period of time, we had an intense negotiation. And it came down to a number that I remember it clearly. It doesn't seem so big today as it did then, but it was big then. And it was wrong. And the taxes that I had paid, the taxes that I owed, and not only I'd done that with good intent as well. I complied with the law, and I had intent to comply with the law, but they seemed to have intent that they were going to justify the 4 days of being drugged through. I thought I was drugged through that knothole, not them. But when it was all done, I had to go to the bank and borrow the money to pay the IRS some money that I believe to this day I did not owe, because if I had otherwise borrowed the money to hire a lawyer to defend myself against the IRS and the federal government, the odds of success were so infinitesimally small that I had to decide, do I want to stand on principle, or do I want, and if I stand on principle, I could sacrifice my company, or do I want to borrow the money and pay bondage to what was an unjust principle and try to keep my business alive? That's what I decided to do. And those who know me for the time I've been here know how hard that is, for me especially. And I had to swallow as hard as I've ever had to swallow, but I went back out to work and I fired up that old bulldozer and I climbed in the seat, and I've told people, and the smoke went out the exhaust stack and out of my ears, that this is the way that a person has to do business in this country. My oldest son owns that business today. He told me a narrative, not telling me the message I would get out of it, that he was joining up with an engineering firm to do a new business venture in addition to our construction work. They had a 90-minute meeting. At the end of that meeting, David King said to the engineer, Mike, do you realize that we've just talked business for 90 minutes? Yes, I surely do. Do you know what our topic was for 90 minutes on this business venture? Taxes. 90 minutes of human resources burned up on how to set up a tax structure to start a new business rather than figuring out how to produce a good or a service that has a marketable value here or abroad. That's what's wrong. It is the waste of human resources that are consumed in compliance with the IRS, and it's the waste of human resources that could be far better used in producing that good or a service that has a marketable value here or abroad. And I've come not full circle on the issue. I stand exactly where I did in that time back in 1980 when I was audited one too many years in a row. But we're in the second generation of King Construction today, and I have to go back and look. Just yesterday, I had a 1-hour meeting with the commissioner of the IRS, Commissioner Koskinen, who is facing a privileged motion as well as a filed motion to face impeachment for malfeasance within the IRS and the violations that I believe happened directly under the watch of Lois Lerner. And so I never imagined, Mr. Speaker, that day that I climbed in the seat of that old bulldozer and the smoke came out of the exhaust stack in my ears, and I began to think, I want to be rid of the IRS. And I went through the process of if you abolish the IRS, then what do you do to replace the revenue? And I spent weeks thinking that through. There was nobody to talk to in those days. I spent weeks thinking through that, and I would go to I called it my Oshkosh Bagosh caucus, the guys in the overalls at 6 a.m. in the morning, and I would sit down. We need to have a national sales tax. We need to replace the IRS. We need to abolish the IRS. Give people their freedom. Let them make their choices on their taxes when they purchase, not have somebody looking over your shoulder, second-guessing all the decisions that you have to make while you're in business. And for weeks we went through that, and they got a little tired of hearing me talk about going to, I didn't call it a fair tax, I didn't have a name for it, except national sales tax. And finally they said, well, if that were such a good idea, we'd have already done it by now. Now, anybody that served much time in Congress knows that's a laugher. We have lots of good ideas that we don't do by now because there are competing interests here. But I've taken this policy to Alan Greenspan, the former chairman. Shortly after he retired, went to his Spartan office in downtown D.C., and I'd asked him if he would be the national spokesman for the FairTax. And it was my mission to be a good salesman, and I am a good salesman. I have a good-looking wife. That's proof positive. A good salesman for the FairTax. And we went through the FairTax, and he said, Congressman, this is not an economic question. You're asking me as an economist to be your spokesman. It's not an economic question. You will not find serious economists that disagree that FairTax does these things that you say. And I said, well, okay, then, and he said it's a political question. So economists should not be selling a political question. Politicians should sell a political question. That's you. You go sell it. And I said, well, let me try this on you. I want to go through this list of things that I say the FairTax does that's good. And I want you to challenge me, interrupt me and challenge me at any point along the way of any component that I've said that can't be sustained in an economic argument, an economic forum. So I went through the list. And I'll just hit some of them, not all of them. FairTax abolishes the tax on productivity. We're punishing productivity in America. People on that side of the aisle believe that consumption drives the economy. Well, not if you don't produce, it doesn't. It's the production that drives the economy, especially when you're exporting, and we need to get that back. It eliminates the tax on production. It eliminates corporate income tax, personal income tax, estate tax, capital gains tax. It allows for the repatriation of the U.S. capital that's stranded overseas by the trillions of dollars that would be reinvested in U.S. And I went through this vast list of things the FairTax does that's good, and I stopped and I said, "You've not interrupted me, Mr. Chairman." He said, "No need to do that, but you left something out. You didn't mention that the FairTax provides an incentive for savings and investment. And this economy desperately needs an incentive for savings and investment." And it wasn't that I left it out on purpose. I just forgot to say it. So he said, add that to what you're saying and keep saying everything else. And so I turned it into this. Now I just tell people the FairTax does everything good that anybody's tax policy does that is good. It does them all. And it does them all better. And that's pretty close to the final word on the topic, and now America needs to come to her senses. And if we want to have a stimulated economy, if we want to reverse this imbalance we have in trade and bring it back to where we have an export surplus instead of an import surplus, if we want to stabilize our currency, if we want to stimulate manufacturing and production in America, if you want to have a stable currency, a stable economy, and an America that is the robust economy in the world again, we go to the FairTax. And that little island of Ireland that has attracted over 700 former U.S. companies that were domiciled in the U.S., now domiciled in Ireland with their little flat tax over there, was 0 for 10 years, became 10, then 13% or so. The dynamics that they've seen on that little island of Ireland with the FairTax in America would be multiplied by a factor that I hesitate to guess at here on the floor of the United States Congress, but it would be an awesome dynamic change to our economy, and we wouldn't need to be importing millions of people from foreign countries to do these jobs Americans wouldn't do, because the wages would go up, the benefits would go up, our competitiveness would go up, and America would be back in the preeminent place in the world again. That's how good this FairTax is. That's why I'm here on the floor to support Mr. Woodall, and I thank you very much for your leadership on this. And